to out of the hat say correctional services is the right thing is utterly premature, I think.
Chris, you're itching to say something then. I think best I let you in right now.
I just want to compliment what Prof has said. Maringa got it dead wrong. In terms of his thinking, and I notice he's got an LLB, he needs to go back. He seemed to think that culpable homicide equals 3 years correctional supervision. That, I'm being a bit melodramatic, but that was in effect his thinking. And Gerinel had no problem in exposing how bad, as he put it, how did he say, grossly inappropriate, shockingly inappropriate. Absolutely right. But the more relevant point, which he was qualified to opine on, was whether Oscar Pistorius was a suitable candidate for correctional supervision if the court was inclined to impose that. And I agree with Prof. In order to be a suitable candidate for correctional supervision, the first requirement, the fundamental requirement, is that you must take responsibility for what you've done. Marius du Toit said this yesterday very eloquently. And I don't see anyway, even with these witnesses, Hartzenberg and Van Zyl, and they're not saying that Oscar is taking responsibility. What they're saying is that he's very sorry, he's very unhappy, he's miserable, he's a victim, but nowhere do you see that statement. For instance, one of them said, he is a broken man who has lost everything, without adding, through his own fault, through his own actions. That's what's missing here. So I agree with Prof. Correctional services, I as a judge, I would put this to Barry Roo. I'd say, where is there an acceptance of responsibility, of accountability here? Where is it?
Because we haven't seen that.
Not at all.
I mean, in all fairness.
He didn't say it at his trial, and the Judge Masipa and the court, with all due respect, in order to find him not guilty, believed him implicitly. And on his story that he gave in court, there wasn't one statement in which Oscar was accepting any responsibility.
Okay, I hear the both of you. We can't blame Maringa, though. He was called to the stand. He was the defense's witness, right?
No.
Well, do you want to go on? Okay. As a correctional services employee and officer who was called to testify about an appropriate sentence, you don't get to speak about an appropriate sentence unless you address each and every purpose of punishment. And he didn't do that. I'm thoroughly expecting that the next social worker that is about to be called will in fact have compiled a thorough report in which she does, it's the lady with the, if I may suggest respectfully, odd hairstyle, sitting behind Barry Roo.
This show is taking an entirely different slant. You realize that?
I'm so
Fashion
sorry.
police are
I just said odd. We're expecting that she's going to present the court with a report which actually does outline all of the requirements of punishment and then fit that into the so-called triad of Zin.
Triad of?
The triad in Zin, and that's where all of my colleagues...
Triad?
The triad in Zin. A case,
Zin.
it comes from a case S versus Zin, Z-I-N-N, in which the court set out that there are actually three factors to consider. The gravity of the offence, the offender himself, and then the interests of society. And so what we've got to do is we've got to superimpose into those three considerations, and this is why it gets complicated, the 4, possibly 5 purposes of punishment, right? The possible rehabilitation of the offender, and that's effectively what this one probation or correctional services officer, Maringa, has spoken about. But beyond that, there's a lot more. What about deterrence? Deterrence individually of Oscar and deterrence of other people with guns out there. Retribution. deterrence can take up to 2.
Right.
Retribution, and then the incapacitation of somebody to commit that offence and to commit that offence again, and the danger that they pose to society. So you've got to take these 5 considerations and plug them in to the triad in Zin. You didn't see any sort of that appreciation of the complexity coming from Maringa's evidence.
But it comes back to what you're saying then, Chris. You can't marry what has happened here in this particular case to 3 years.
I first want to answer something important. Professor Grant referring to this lady's hairdo as odd. I'm objecting to that.
I can see why.
Please uphold it. I'll concede.
In 1973, when I was appointed as the first non-white magistrate, I arrived with a very nice afro. And then we had these type of remarks
Comments.
about me and comments. Yeah.
Yes, so you identify with this
Yeah,
woman.
I love her. I love her hairdo. I like that Amy Winehouse aura that she's exhibiting.
I'm going to be moving this discussion right along at this point.
So the argument is just because you used to be odd, now she's not.
Let's stand down, gentlemen, on this right very quickly now. I want to get back to this. It was perhaps a good idea on the defense's part to bring in Maringa at this point, although from what you've both seen, you've poked enough holes into it. But is it going to necessarily hurt the sentencing process for Oscar?
I would say that it can't hurt it, but it could have been better played. If it is an ace, it could have been played right at the end when you've dealt with all of the other requirements and considerations, and then you close off by saying, actually, correctional supervision would be perfectly appropriate.
What I will say as a judge is that I would accord it very, very limited weight. It helps Oscar to some extent.
What a wonderful break, and at the right point. We are going to take you now directly back to the High Court in Pretoria.